Tim Cook stepped onto the stage at Apple Park on June 8 and delivered what was, by any measure, the most significant Siri announcement Apple has made since the Assistant launched in 2011. Siri's got memory, Siri's got context, Siri's got a dedicated app and the ability to take multi-step actions across your phone without you lifting a finger. On one hand, it was the overhaul Apple's critics had been demanding for years. Yet on the other, Apple stock closed that day at $301, down by almost 2%. Now, both of those things are true, and understanding why they are both true tells you more about AAPL as an investment than almost anything else you'll read this week. My name is Phoebe, and you're watching Trading Key. The one problem Tim Cook never solved. When Tim Cook took over from Steve Jobs in August 2011, Apple was already the most valuable company in the world. What Cook did over the next 15 years was structurally different from what most people give him credit for. The narrative says Cook turned Apple into a trillion-dollar company, but that undersells it. Jobs gave Cook a hardware business, and Cook turned it into a services business. In 2016, Apple's services segment generated roughly $24 billion in revenue. By 2025, it generated over $100 billion at software margins that dwarf what you get from selling an iPhone. The App Store, iCloud, Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, and Apple Pay collectively generate the kind of recurring, high-margin revenue that compounds differently from a device cycle. That pivot is entirely Cook's. He also quietly rebuilt Apple's supply chain to reduce its China dependency, moving meaningful production to India and Vietnam before tariffs made it a political issue. But there is one thing Cook never cracked, and he knew it. When ChatGPT launched in November 2022, Siri couldn't answer a follow-up question without the user repeating full context each time. When Gemini started writing code and reasoning through complex problems, Siri was still struggling to set timers correctly. And so, Apple lost 3 years while its rivals built moats. In a world where every serious technology company is racing to define the AI era, Apple's flagship AI product was a punchline. The recent WWDC was Cook's last chance to fix that on his watch. On September 1st, he hands the keys to John Ternus and moves to executive chairman. What he announced on June 8 was his final statement on whether Apple can compete in the AI era. And he knew it. What Apple announced at WWDC 2026. Let me walk through what Siri AI actually is, because the product details matter for the investment thesis. The new Siri carries conversation history. It remembers what you asked 5 minutes ago, 5 hours ago, and across sessions. It has personal context, meaning it can reference your calendar, emails, messages, and photos to answer questions that depend on knowing who you are and what you are doing. And it has on-screen awareness, which means it can see what you are looking at and act on it. You can show Siri a restaurant bill and ask it to split the total 4 ways. You can show it an email thread and ask it to draft a reply based on your previous responses to that person. Tell it to find all the photos from a specific trip and create an album. These aren't demo features. They're the kind of tasks that currently require 3 different apps and 10 minutes of your time. The underlying engine powering all of this is Google Gemini. Apple confirmed a multi-year licensing deal worth roughly $1 billion per year, using a model estimated at 1.2 trillion parameters to handle the heavy reasoning tasks that on-device processing cannot manage alone. Here's why that matters structurally. Apple treating Gemini as a licensed component is the same approach it takes with Samsung OLED panels or Qualcomm modems. It does not need to own the foundational model. It needs to own the interface layer, where that model meets 2.2 billion active devices. Think of it as the difference between building a highway and owning the toll gate. Google builds and maintains the road. Apple owns every single exit ramp. The Gemini deal also tells you something about Apple's capital discipline. Microsoft, Meta, Google, and Amazon are projected to spend over $470 billion combined on AI infrastructure in 2026. Apple's infrastructure spend is estimated at $14.3 billion, roughly 3% of what the hyperscalers are burning. That difference stays inside Apple's margin and flows back to shareholders. Though there's one important asterisk to note here. Siri AI will not be available in the EU or China at launch, as Apple cited regulatory complexity in both markets. Those two regions represent a significant portion of Apple's installed base, and the restriction is a real constraint on how quickly the Siri AI ecosystem can scale globally. Why Apple's stock fell after its biggest AI announcement. The market's response was mixed and then negative, and it's worth understanding precisely why, because it tells you what investors were actually hoping for. When Cook began the Siri AI demo, the stock popped. AAPL briefly touched $317 intraday. That initial move reflected genuine optimism, but what followed was a reread of what Apple didn't say. There was no launch date. Apple said Siri AI would arrive, and I quote, later this year. For a company that has been promising Siri improvements since 2022 and missing internal milestones since then, later this year is not a commitment, it's a placeholder. Investors who had been pricing in an iOS 27 launch in September bundled with Siri AI as the catalyst for the next upgrade cycle were left without confirmation that the timeline holds. This matters because the investment thesis on Apple right now is not about what the company earned last quarter. It is about whether a feature compelling enough to push 300 million overdue upgraders to buy a new iPhone actually ships on time. Morgan Stanley estimated in late 2025 that AI-driven iPhone demand could push sales to 262 million units in 2026, roughly a 10% year-over-year jump. That estimate depended on meaningful AI features launching with the new iPhone lineup. The recent WWDC is the first credible attempt to close that gap, but credible is not the same as confirmed. And so, the context makes the reaction rational. This isn't the first time Apple has announced Siri AI features that failed to ship on schedule. The credibility gap is real, and the market is pricing it. The bull and bear case for AAPL after WWDC. Let me give you both sides, because this is a stock with legitimate arguments in each direction. The bull case starts with distribution. No AI company on Earth can reach 2.2 billion devices without spending years and hundreds of billions of dollars to build what Apple already has. Siri AI, if it ships, does not need to be the top-ranked AI assistant on a benchmark test. It needs to be the assistant that is already on the phone in your pocket, deeply integrated with the apps you already use. Apple's history with AirPods, the App Store, and Apple Pay is that it enters a category late and wins it through ecosystem lock-in rather than first-mover advantage. This is the same playbook. The capital efficiency angle is also real. The four hyperscalers are burning cash at a rate that is straining their free cash flow and worrying their long-term investors. Apple is spending $14.3 billion, while the others spend $470 billion combined. That margin differential does not disappear. And if Siri AI genuinely drives an upgrade cycle, Apple captures the revenue without proportionally increasing the cost base that generated it. At $301, Apple trades at roughly 30 times forward earnings. Now, that isn't cheap in absolute terms, but it isn't stretched if the upgrade cycle materializes in the back half of 2026. The bear case is simpler. There is no launch date, and the EU and China exclusions limit the near-term addressable market for the product's most monetizable use cases. Then there is the succession variable. On September 1st, John Ternus becomes Apple's CEO. He is the best hardware engineer Apple has produced in the post-Jobs era. The M-series chips, Apple Silicon, and AirPods all bear his fingerprints. What he has never run is Apple's software and services businesses, which is exactly where the margin growth has come from and where the Siri AI thesis lives. Cook moves to executive chairman and stays involved, so this is not a clean break. But the first real test of Ternus's credibility will almost certainly be the iOS 27 launch, where either Siri AI ships and the upgrade cycle begins, or it slips again and a new leadership team absorbs the blame. So, there are 3 things to watch before September. First, any confirmation that Apple is opening the Siri AI API to developers ahead of schedule. When Apple gives developers early access, the launch timeline typically compresses, and the market reprices quickly. Second, supply chain data on iOS 27 component orders. Suppliers begin ramping production months in advance, and channel checks from analysts who track this tend to surface before official announcements. Third, any public statement from Ternus on the AI roadmap. How he talks about Siri AI timelines in his first appearances as CEO-elect will tell investors a great deal about what the next 12 months actually look like. Buy, hold, or avoid AAPL right now. The honest answer depends on your time horizon. If you're thinking in quarters, the risk is asymmetric against you. There is no confirmed launch date for the product the current valuation is partly pricing in. The EU and China restrictions limit the near-term addressable market, and a new CEO is about to run his first major product cycle with the eyes of every institutional investor on him. None of that creates a clean short-term entry. If you are thinking in years, the case is different. Apple's distribution advantage over every other AI company is structural, not cyclical. The decision to license Gemini rather than burn $100 billion building infrastructure from scratch is a durable margin decision, not a workaround. And the upgrade cycle, whenever it arrives, is the largest single demand event in the smartphone market since the 5G transition. Tim Cook bet 15 years of credibility on whether Apple could show up late to the AI era and still win, but unfortunately, he didn't get to see the outcome. Now, that question now belongs to John Ternus, and the answer will be written in the iOS 27 launch, not in a WWDC keynote. So, where do you land? Are you adding AAPL here at $301, or are you waiting to see whether Siri AI actually ships with iOS 27 inches September? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for joining me today. If you found this video helpful, remember to subscribe to Trading Key, give this video a like, and share it with a friend who might just benefit from learning this too. With that, I'll see you in the next one.